make a correction on my last tape.
All right, go right ahead.
You asked me, did I ever feel like, how do I put this? That I had been prejudiced against. That's not how to say it.
That's that discriminated.
Discriminated against. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I said no. And I think my answer should be yes. More times than I ever didn't even realize that people
Hmm.
were discriminating against me on the basis of racism. And I thought, whatever I thought, that wasn't the case.
Hmm.
And the reason why I say that, because things are so hot now with
Hmm.
George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and I could go on and on and on, that you just don't notice these kind of things.
Unhidden Voices family, and welcome to episode 29. And happy birthday, Mom. This episode is a celebration of my mom's birthday. She turned in on March 31st. I don't think she talks and she doesn't share her year, but let's say she's a senior and we're celebrating her. We learned a lot about her experience growing up, her experiences with schooling, what got her into teaching, and then also talking about our family history and our legacy from her grandmother all the way up and back into the enslavement of our family in this country. So please listen to this episode. I know you'll learn a lot from it and you'll enjoy it. As a gift to Mom, please like this episode. And as a gift to yourself, subscribe to this podcast because there's a lot of information that you'll learn where you might not get from anyone else. So listen, learn, and amplify with us. Well, also, I think your status has changed, right? Because now, first of all, you're a retired person, so you're not coming into contact with as much as you would as a person who was, when you're working every day and obviously or going to school or things of that nature. And then also you have become and evolved into like the matriarch of the family and a senior. So all of these things also make you a little bit less, I think people may show you respect because of your status. Do you feel that, or do you experience that?
Yeah, I understand that.
Do
But
you
I
think that's
still
true?
think that there's a lot of racism that goes on because I think the way things with the advent of Donald Trump and everything, that we see so much more racism because you have people who aren't afraid to be bigoted and loudmouth about it and just carry on and do things that are just unforgettable, unforgivable.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I want to actually, this conversation is going to be a little bit different from our other conversation, which was centered around, all the more societal issues. Although we did talk a little bit about family, but I want to spend more time talking about your history, and especially because it's your birthday. And so I think it's important to have those conversations. And one of the things that I was so surprised, and I think, so for the audience, my youngest daughter sent my mom an iPhone, and I don't think so she hasn't really gotten all of the features yet. So some things I think, like with the group text, did you see the photos?
I saw that they were there.
Okay, that's step one. Step two was like opening and looking at them, I suppose.
Yeah.
But so this morning, Hussein. So this is my mom's first cousin's name is Ray. One of them. This is Aunt Bunk's son, Ray, and Ray's has, Aunt Bunk's grandson, Hussein. So this is Ray's son. So Hussein started just texting me all of these wonderful things, right? And he texted me photographs. He said, I've been going through the crates, and he sent me the obituary for your grandmother. Believable, right? And so I sent it to you, and this is why you have to be able to use your phone. But in the meantime, I'm going to share it with you because I learned some things that I did not know about her, like that she was a school teacher. Did you know that?
Nurse. She taught at St. Paul, which was it still is a college in Lawrenceville.
But see, I thought when the way that you always told me the story, I always thought that she trained nurses. But this,
well, she was teaching people how to be nurses.
Right, but I didn't. But okay, let me read this because
and her son taught there. Uncle James, he taught dry cleaning. Remember, Booker T. Washington had this idea about the normal school, and they would teach Black people like how to make beds and how to be servants.
Vocational work.
Yes.
Vocational work. So, because at the time, I think, and so, all right, so hold on, because also we need to let people know this time frame, and this also I think is really interesting because I didn't know until I read this. Because this morning when you and I talked, and I asked you what year did you come to California, and you said 1966. And then when I read the obituary, your grandmother died in 1966.
7.
Well, it says here.
She and Daddy died right after I got here.
So did you go back to can you talk? Okay, wait, wait, let me just read this. It says, as a child, she enjoyed the activities usually enjoyed by children. She received her education in the public schools of Brunswick County, and at the age of 16, became one of the public school teachers.
Okay.
So I never knew that. Instead, she derived much pleasure from helping to shape the destinies of young people. She was married to the late Norman Hamlin, and to this union, 6 children were born, all of whom survived. At that time, all of whom had survived because this was 1966. So this is, and it says that she was spoke in the Christmas program on December 18th, 1966. She did a presentation on and gave thanks at the Christmas program. And it so anyway, I just was so, I'm going to send you the entire thing. I'll email it to you, but I was so moved by it. And I was like, it's just so wonderful to know that we have, like, we're come from a line of teachers. Your grandmother, and then you, and now me. So, and school administrators. So let's go back in time to, I just wanted you to share a little bit more about growing up, and also the difference between Virginia and New Jersey from your remembrance. And can you, so let's begin with you describing your grandmother to us.
Well, I really loved my grandmother, and I worshiped my grandmother. And I remember that she used to use Johnson & Johnson baby powder. After she would take a bath, she would put it all over her. And I remember one time we were going someplace and I kissed her on her elbow, and she was embarrassed. Like, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. And I was like, what's wrong with that? Actually, when we left, my father was in the military during World War II. And when he got out, my mother was in Virginia with Aunt Bunk, Aunt Boo, her grandmother, her mother, and my grandmother's husband, who was named Paul Hamlin. That's all.
Goodrich.
Paul Goodrich. Yes.
Because in the obituary it says that Paul Goodrich had a bunch of kids himself, and she became a stepmother to a lot of children.
About 6 kids together. not
10. It was like something like 10 or something, 10 or 11 altogether. But do you remember those children? Like, do you remember them?
I don't think I ever saw them.
So, so you were how old when you moved to Virginia?
I think I was probably, Carmen was born in Atlantic City. I was born in North Jersey in Glen Ridge. And so I think right after my birth, my mother probably moved to Atlantic City where Carmen was born. But we were staying with Aunt Helen.
Mm-hmm. So your mom had, and this, and there were 6 siblings, and everyone calls Uncle James Uncle Ham, which I just didn't. I just found this out very recently. But he was the only boy,
Yeah.
and your mom was the oldest. So
Yeah.
for everyone, and I think that I don't know if this is a Jersey thing or a Virginia thing, but there is lots of nicknames for people. So
The black thing.
couldn't understand. You need a T-shirt,
No, when we lived in Virginia, Dolores, Carmen, and myself, and mom, and then dad came. But once dad came, he couldn't find work in Virginia. So then we ended up moving to Atlantic City.
And then what was his job? What did he start doing?
He was a house painter, but more so, he did wallpaper.
Mm-hmm. And what about your mom?
My mom worked at first at a laundry in Atlantic City, and then she would do day work. And she also ended up, her last job was that she worked at a cleaners in Margate.
So, do you remember now? And I think the last time when I interviewed you, you started talking about like being in elementary school and being, and schools being integrated. But can you talk about your schooling experience? Like, what was it like for you, being in like elementary or high school?
Well, when I was in Atlantic City, we started out at Atlantic City, um, New Jersey Avenue School. And I remember being in first grade, and I think I've mentioned this before, that we went on a field trip to Philadelphia to the zoo. And I always liked school, but I guess I really liked school when I got into junior high because I remember taking art classes and things like that. And I was I really loved my art teacher and my English teacher. And my art teacher, I remember, I think Carmen and we weren't in class, we were in the hall. And I wrote a note for Carmen, and Carmen ended up giving it to my teacher. She didn't realize it.
Oh, wait, what did it say?
I caught, huh? Please excuse Brenda Harker, but she wasn't Brenda Herbert because I know.
Wait, so I have this question, and I know like can you talk about like the aunties, like aunt
Well, everybody,
all of these people like Aunt Donna and Aunt Barbara and Aunt Stiffy, like how did all these people come into your
okay.
life?
When we lived in Atlantic City, the schools we had to be bused to the junior high school if we lived uptown. And our friends, we met them the first year, and Donna Lee used to go with my cousin Jimmy Jack. And so we met Donna Lee, and Donna Lee, she said she would teach us how to smoke. And so Martin and I were like trying to learn how to smoke. And then we said, okay, when we go home, let's just go to the table and break out the cigarettes because Daddy always said if you want to smoke, come home and smoke first. And we went home, lit up cigarettes at the dining room table. Daddy hit the ceiling. Right. But it was he was the one that said, always bring whatever you're going to do home. I guess that was his psychology.
Well, he didn't think you would have that audacity. But cousin Mikey said that you did that in front of her dad. You tried to smoke up there in East Orange.
Because
What?
we were under the illusion that there was nothing wrong with it, that we were just, because all the kids smoked, right?
Yes. But you also had, and these are the stories that I get from, like, I remember Aunt Carmen and all the aunties talking about you in particular having like a love for like the arts and the films and like Marilyn Monroe. And so can you talk a little bit about your interest in that culture?
The movies was my whole life. I don't think I could have grown up in Atlantic City if it wasn't for movies. And I was in love literally with all the actors and actresses. And so I used to think that the world revolved around. So I used to try to imitate Marilyn Monroe. And so I would go, oh, can't do it now. I can't even think about it. But anyway, Carmen and I used to, not that we were bad girls, but we used to go to the soldiers' home where Daddy put his foot down. We definitely couldn't go there. And we would say that we were babysitting, and the babysitter was, we didn't really charge her when we did babysit. So this was like returning a favor. And they had this dance. They would have dances at the soldiers' home. I don't know why. I was just weird. So I decided to imitate. It was like a talent show. Imitate Marilyn Monroe.
What? Did you win?
No, but I got the name of MM for the rest of my high school days. And Clyde Lewis used to, Clyde, was it Clyde Lewis used to call me Boney Bryn.
Mm.
'Cause I
So
was,
wait, and just so the soldiers' home is like a dance hall in Atlantic City.
well, now it's been refurbished. It's really beautiful. That's where we had Carmen's wake.
Yes, repast the
Wake,
repast. Yeah.
the pass.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I think movies made everything endurable. And then I used to dream of Paris and French and, just my whole, I think that's why I was able to go to California because I had been, I don't know, freed. I had been so fascinated by the movies. Even now, I watch film noir religiously.
Yeah. So what about? So did your mom start taking in rumors, and how did that
My
work?
mom, well, we had we had like three bedrooms upstairs: mom's bedroom, Carmen's bedroom, and my bedroom. And so we Barbara was going to have, I think this is the way I found out about it, but she had like Stiffy and Sani's sister stayed at her house, but that didn't work. So we said, oh, you could come and stay at our house. And then Stiffy and Nancy rented rooms from mom in the summertime until we got older. And then Stiffy and I decided to rent an apartment on New Hampshire Avenue. And that really hurt mom, not just, ego, but also because she lost money.
Yeah.
And
Wait. Well,
then
how old were you then?
I was about 17 or 18. They would come down in the summertime. Stiffy and Nancy were in Westchester State Teachers College. And Nancy actually turned me on to reading and literature. And so we would read books together and discuss them. And then I started going to New York. And I would go to New York and oh God, I had such fun. I would just go up sometimes just to see a play, watch the play, and come back the same day. Just take the bus up for the day. And it was weird because mom wasn't, she was very fearful and fretful. So the fact that she even let me go still puzzles me. I guess she saw something I didn't see.
And also, apparently, like this was also very much something that you love, like the whole,
Love.
yeah, the arts and all
Yeah.
that. So I could see that. So, what was your favorite book that you shared and you read with Nancy,
The
with Aunt
Fountainhead
Nancy?
by Ayn Rand. Oh,
Hmm.
I fell in love with the main character's name was Howard Roark, and he was very independent. He was an architect.
Wow.
And
So,
Ayn Rand was, I think she was a leftist. She came up with all these theories, you
mm,
know, and so there was a whole bubble around her. It was, I remember when I was in New York, I was going to Columbia and I was walking down Broadway and I saw this sign on Rand, you know, that she was going to be appearing. But I think it was an old sign because I never really, I don't remember how it resolved. But I used to love to read and discuss it. And Carmen hated me for that
why did she hate that?
because she said, you always mess up everything for everybody. Don't ask those questions. But later that became my livelihood.
Yes, indeed. That's what you do for a living. But I really get like that this is, I think like the lineage, it's coming through you. It's in your bloodstream and it's just coming out. But I have a question about so because I've seen photos of you like with Sammy Davis Jr. and stuff like that. And I remember the other it was a couple months ago, you were over here and we watched the Apollo
Yeah.
performance. Did you ever go to Apollo live? And do you remember seeing people
I
live?
when I first no, I think when I first moved away from home, I moved to Dolores to stay with Dolores and Roger, and that didn't work out. And then I stayed with Peachy and Sonny, who lived in the Bronx. And they would go to the Apollo every Wednesday night, sunshine, rain, snow, sleet, whatever, because that was amateur night. And I went with them at least once because I do recall what it was like.
Well, what was it like?
Well, it was like it was in the movies. Like people would appear with their talent, and if they weren't liked, people would throw things at them, and it was.
Wow. Do you
And
remember
I don't think it was my cup because I don't remember. Like they used to go every Wednesday night, and I don't remember going.
that way? Mhm.
Yeah,
So, but you also you worked at a place where you would have acts and stuff like that in Atlantic City, right? Because that's how you met Sammy Davis Jr.
yeah. I worked at the Wonder Gardens, which was on Kentucky Avenue, Antarctic Avenue. And it was a nightclub, but it was more kind of like a concert hall, I think. You know, they would have all kinds of stars there, but down the street on Kentucky Avenue was the famous Club Harlem. And Club Harlem would compare with the Cotton Club, and they would have Sammy Davis Jr. and bigger stars. But the Wonder Garden would have jazz, like they had a lot of jazz entertainers. And the people who owned it, Sonny McCall and Bob Bell, they were they were nice guys, and they believed in the music.
Yeah, one of the things that Hussein, when he was sending me all these things this morning, he sent me a picture of this is his maternal great grandfather. His maternal great grandfather was a jazz musician who played with Louis Armstrong. And I
Wow.
was, yeah, he said for like 10 years. Huh? Purcell something. I don't, I had it. He sent it to me along with he sent me the obituary for his great grandfather, his maternal as well. But I was just so blown away. And I asked him, because he said there's like crates of all these images. He sent me like photos of his, Aunt Bunk and Aunt Helen together, and pictures of his dad and his grandfather, so Uncle Ray and Uncle James on the basketball team. It was like the whole basketball team. And they were on basketball team. I didn't know. I mean, that was phenomenal. So then I was thinking like maybe that's how, right, they met. And then he introduced, obviously, maybe Uncle Ray to Buck.
See, mom left Lawrenceville when she was 16, and she went to live in New York, and that's where she met Uncle Robert, Dolores's dad. And she met my dad in New York too.
Oh, okay. But your mom was born in 1912.
Yes.
And
to say she was born in 1914.
That's what she said.
And then she had told me that all my life. And then I was talking to Aunt Helen, the sibling that was the next oldest to my mother. And I said, oh, Mom was born in 1914. And Aunt Helen said, and Aunt Helen didn't say any bad words. She said, that's a lie, because I was born in 1914. Gertrude was born in 1912.
Well, one of the things that I remember just a few things about Aunt Helen. First of all, I just think it was like when I was a child, I remember that everyone was alive except for Nana had passed, but like all and Uncle Ham, Uncle James, everyone else was alive.
Irene, she was the oldest of my father's sisters.
Okay, so I remember Aunt Sis. I never met Aunt Irene.
It was Irene, Sis, Daddy, Charlotte, and Mabel.
Okay, so everyone. So I didn't. Yeah. Okay. So but I was actually only talking about the maternal folks, but yeah. I do remember that Aunt Helen she used to send us a fruitcake every year. And it came in a can, like a canister, like a red canister with fruitcake inside of it as a gift every year in the mail. So I always tell that story because I don't really have, like, I have pictures with all of them together, but I don't really have any photos of Aunt Helen. And I was trying.
Aunt Helen and you.
Oh yeah, so that would be great because I think also as we're kind of sharing this episode, I will share some photos with people so they'll know who we're talking about. But one of the things that I always really appreciated about you, Mom, is how you made sure that we were connected to like the family and were involved, and like you had sent me to stay with Aunt Helen and like Aunt Boo, like Aunt Carmen, Aunt Dolores, like you kept us very connected. And so, can you talk about where that idea came from and why you felt that was important
That
to you?
came from my mother. My mother went to New York and she met Daddy and they got married, and she moved first to Montclair with her sister and then to Atlantic City. And then she moved back to New Jersey, but she was always so, I mean, back to Virginia. So I always knew like who everybody was, what my relatives were. And mom kept that going in the photographs, which have always been around. So I guess it came from grandma.
Yeah, because you also very much knew the history, the story, of like Polly Jackson
But
now.
Polly Jackson, I got that from, oh God, I can't remember her name. I'm sitting here talking about, oh yes, I'm connected to everybody and I know it. I can't remember her name. Harriet Vaughn.
Mm.
And she was the oldest person at the family reunion. Um, she was 100 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
So okay, so so for those that are listening or watching this podcast, the other thing is that I have kind of adopted this role of trying to be a documentarian. So part of that's what this podcast is. But I really also feel very strongly about being that, doing that historically for our family. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm just so appreciative to Hussein. To thank you again, Hussein, for sharing these images with
Yes,
me. But
thank you,
yeah, this is just beyond, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And he actually sent the family tree, which starts with Georgia Vaughn and Washington Vaughn. And so for those of and he sent Polly Jackson and all 10 of her kids and her kids' kids. So I think this was all material that must have been shared at the family
But
reunion.
Dolores, the first family reunion, Dolores and Aunt Bunk, I think, put it together.
Well, it said in there, it said this was he sent me, I think, like I want to say like an invitation, or like probably what was read, a testimonial for the family reunion, like the program.
Mm-hmm.
And it said Dolores Crowd, this was brought together by Dolores Crowdy, who is and says who she was. But then I loved it because it clearly shows how we're all connected. And I had done this work on ancestry.com, but there was some disconnect. So just having everything laid out is just phenomenal, and seeing how everything is interwoven is really, really great. But so can you talk about your interest in in the family history?
Oh, I have always loved my family, so I think it stemmed from mom. And then when I left, I remember putting all these pictures in a shoebox. And I had that shoebox for a long time. And then I found out that I could copy the pictures. So I copied the pictures. I had them photographed at this shop in Oakland at 51st and 51st and Broadway. And I was really very pleased with that. And I made extra copies like of mom. And I think that kind of thing, but you can probably do it yourself now. But it's a great way to preserve and to pass on.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. One of the things that I started very recently was also making sure, and this is just a tip for people, because I know like when we do these digital pictures, people don't do it as much, but making sure that if you have the printout of the photo, that you actually write who's in this photo and the year, because it becomes an artifact. And I have there's a photo that I was like, it was all of these people, including your grandmother, sitting on the couch. It's like 6 or 8 people. And I was like, who's this? And, because I recognized like maybe 2 of them. And then Hussein was like, that's Uncle Wolf and Uncle Bill and Aunt Allie and like all these people that are just like extended, folks that you probably remember when you were in Virginia, but I wouldn't know now because it's so far removed. It's like 4 generations.
Well, we drove down there, and I remember this was during the family reunion, which was the second family reunion. We went past Aunt Ruth's house, and Aunt Ruth, I remember when I was a little girl, she had a picture of Georgia Vaughan, the first Georgia Vaughan. Yeah, I think it was the first Georgia Vaughan, who was in this beautiful lace dress with like a parasol. And when I went back, I thought, oh, I'm going to ask her, can I have it? And so she told me that it had been destroyed because the roof leaked, and I guess they put the pictures, and I was so hurt because she was married to the person who was related to us. And of course, I was like, if it happened to her family, that was a terrible attitude. I know, I'm sorry, you can't move. But it just struck me how fragile these things are, and you do have to make copies and you do have to pass them out to people. You can't be responsible for the only picture taken around the turn of the century of my great grandmother.
Exactly right. And one of the things that it dawned on me was, because the family tree that I referenced ends at like the eldest child in my kids' generation, right? So like under my name it says Leilani. It doesn't say any of the other kids, because this actually probably reunion happened in the 90s. And so none of those people were born yet, right? But now there's like, we have to keep going and like continue the story and the legacy and sharing this information and letting them know who their family and who they descend from. And one of the things that Hussein wrote to me was, he was talking, because it's the letter, it's the letter that F.W. Green wrote. So this is your grandmother's father was a slaveholder. Right? So this is like 7, right? So for me, it's so far, it's like 8 generations.
It's Polly Green's.
Polly Jackson. So Polly Jackson. So, okay. So I'm going to do this, and this is going to be fun. Okay. So my mom's name's Brenda, and so great. And so mom's mom, my grandmother's name was Gertrude. Gertrude's mother's name was Georgia. Georgia's mother's name was Georgia. And that Georgia's mother's name was Polly. So,
or I think I've seen Mary someplace.
Well, it's Mary Polly Jackson. Yeah, it's Mary Polly Jackson, but everyone called her Polly.
So we need to put Daddy's military stuff on Ancestry.com.
We do. But I want to just get this out about Polly Jackson. So Polly Jackson was an enslaved woman, and she had 9 or 10. Well, from this was 10. I think one might have died in childbirth. I think it was 10 because I have the names of everybody and their children. So 10 children, and one of them was Georgia, who was our direct ancestor, right? Maternal ancestor. But one of the things that, sorry?
She was the youngest.
Georgia was? Oh, really? I did not know that. Okay, so.
The oldest was Mary Ann's grandmother. Foster.
Yes, the Foster, Mary Ann Foster. So, but Polly Jackson, so after the Civil War, in the 1870s. So this was not, so she was not freed, right? But there was,
Free with the Emancipation.
right, she was because of the Emancipation Proclamation, but I'm saying that
Right.
slaveholder didn't free them, even though, you know, he fathered her children. But he did leave her lands, right? He left, well, not to her son, Harry.
Yeah, I think he left her land too, because that property in Lawrenceville was my grandmother's house.
So I think it was like, but so we have this letter written from him that says, like, you know, to Polly and her son Harry, you know, I leave this amount of land and I leave a blue chest and a steer, right? And so I did the calculations, and it's something like that land today would be worth like $1 million, like, you know.
It's very small. I don't think so.
Well, no, I'm talking about the worth of, you know, if you're just talking about the net worth of everything that, you know, today, it was like, what, you know, he was rich. That's the point, you know, of the story, is that this man had a lot of affluence at the time compared to, like, to have that to leave somebody. And he also, that wasn't all he owned, because he also left.
It's incredible that he left it, that he had the nerves, fortitude to leave his family something.
So, but what I loved about what Hussein said was, he said, you know, most
You have this material
what Hussein wrote.
that he
Yes,
gave you.
he texted to me. So I have it, but I think it was really powerful, because he was like, you know, most enslaved people, they have nothing, and she got, you know, land, and he was like, she was a bad woman. You know, like, she, like, bad meaning good, mom. So but the point was, it was just like, you know, just saying that we're all descended from this woman who had the, you know, wherewithal to even probably, you know, convince this person to give her that. Sorry?
And to go to school and improve herself.
She went to school?
Yeah, she's a teacher.
I'm talking about Polly Jackson.
Oh no, Polly Jackson didn't have access to school.
No, they were all illiterate, I believe, up until
I don't know that.
Your grandmother. So I think her mother, because I had the census records, and your great grandmother was an illiterate woman. Georgia, the first Georgia. Because she lived a long time, and probably because, as you said, she was the youngest one. All right, so I'm just going to ask a couple more around.
My grandmother was not illiterate. You mean her mother?
Yes, I said your great grandmother.
I don't know about that.
Well, according to the census,
but they all spoke such great English. And my mom's handwriting was wonderful. We have copies of the census that was taken, and Mom's filled it out with her name and all the information. It's hard for me to believe that her mother was illiterate.
Not your mom, your mom's mom, your grandmother and your great grandmother
was illiterate, because my grandmother was a teacher, as you mentioned, and they were land. They owned land.
They owned land. This is true. But also there was racism. So maybe they weren't, because also I do remember hearing the story that one of the reasons why F.W. Green left them the land was because he was going blind, and he had taught Harry how to read and write, and Harry read for him. And I remember that story. So, and then he felt gratitude. So Harry was, you know, one of their sons, one of the 10 children.
It was a big deal during Reconstruction. because he managed to become a surveyor, and
Mm-hmm.
he was the son of a slaveholder.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's hard to tell like what things were like from our position,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that they did enjoy some sense of privilege.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but just some.
Mm-hmm.
At least that branch of the family.
Yeah. So I want to ask you just a couple more questions before we go. But first, I wanted to know what made you decide that you wanted to be a teacher?
Well, I knew about the history of the family. And when I was an undergraduate student at San Francisco State, I got a detached retina. I was doing dishes over the sink with the cabinet open and bumped my head on the cabinet.
Mm.
And my vision, but I was studying to be a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And then I couldn't, because we used to watch films in the dark with flashlights to take notes and things. But I remembered that I had put on my application, I had checked credential, and
Mm.
I wasn't even sure what a credential was. Sorry. But I decided to check into that department and see what it was. And so I ended up teaching middle school and high school, 50%, 50%. And I was teaching at Luther Burbank Junior High and at Balboa High School, and I loved it. I was teaching drama at at the high school, and we did a production of A Raisin in the Sun, and it was so good that we traveled and performed at other high schools.
You had me play Travis
Well, we needed somebody young.
because you gave me an afro. I had an afro. You made me play Travis. I remember that. And
But
also, your student was in Vogue.
she was Cindy. Yeah.
All right. So, what do you think? Because you've taught for several years. So, can you talk a little bit about your experience as a teacher and what you think about like your contribution to teaching was?
I actually loved teaching because I loved to see minds developed. And I loved it when that light would go on, that inquisitive light. And I used to teach my students to start with a question. And I loved reading. So it gave me an opportunity to indulge and get involved in something I really like to do. And it became my job. Um, Yeah, I love teaching. I love the students. I love the discussions. Sometimes I couldn't wait to get to class because the discussions were so great.
Is there any student or any sort of conversation that kind of just out you'll never forget, like it just kind of resonates with you?
Well, there are lots of conversations, but the one that stands out in my mind is we were reading Native Son by Richard Wright, and it was a night class, and I would start out with 5 questions, and then I would put students in groups for discussion. And in this class, I was actually just going around the room um, and letting people just talk as a whole class. And my question was Bigger Thomas, oh, what was my question? Oh, I can't think of my question. I'll think about it in a minute. But anyway, the guy answered the question, and it set the whole class off. Was he? It wasn't naive. Oh God, this is anticlimactic. Um, Mr. Thomas. 30 years. Talk about something else and I'll come back to it.
Okay.
Counts on the kid, who answered the question.
Okay, so then what about, students? Do because part of do you have students that you have meant a lot to you, and can you describe, your experiences with some of your students?
Well, I have always really loved my students, but sometimes they didn't love me as much as I loved them. And I can't get this question out of my mind now. So I'm not going to make another reference to it. But I always loved students, and I loved students the most who would participate and get involved in the discussions and get involved with the reading.
One of the things I really also think, so because you taught at a community college for a number of years, you really did help so many people to matriculate into, getting a 4-year college, or even like if they wanted to go to grad school and stuff like that. And so why did you think that was really important, an important aspect of your job?
Well, I remember one day somebody told me that students never come back to community college to say thank you or let teachers know, but they always do that with 4-year colleges. I don't know if this is true or not, but I remember I was walking with a colleague and I saw one of my students and she said, Miss Harker. And she said she had been thinking about me, and she said, nobody ever told her that she could write. And I told her that she could write, and she started crying. And we both started crying. And it was like,
Oh.
And I like introducing new material like The Last Black Man in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Where people could see something from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mom, I think probably the person that I credit, I feel like you are my greatest teacher, and I have so much appreciation for you. And I love having these conversations with you. I feel like I learn, even though I know these stories, I just love hearing them, over again. And I really want to just thank you for, joining me for this conversation and sharing some more of your stories and your wisdom with us and your experiences. It's such a joy.
Can I share one more?
Absolutely.
I don't want to get pigeonholed by the material that I use, but I remember when we used to use Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And I remember one of my students said, I never thought that I would be able to read Dostoevsky. So it's like opening up something that students hadn't conceived of doing or being before.
But what also is like, what I love about you too is that you hold all of these folks. Like, I remember you taking us to see Richard Pryor. I remember, learning about Diana Ross and watching the Supremes. And like, when you're watching, the greatest joy for me was watching you watch the Apollo, because you knew oh, that's Pearl Bailey. That's this, all, that's Lena Horne. That's like, them.
My father knew everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my mother was not there yet, but my father knew everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was amazing. And in film, he was a real film buff.
Mm. So then you think you got that from him, your interest in the, see.
He nurtured.
Wow.
And he used to work at the 500 Club as a painter. And the 500 Club was this club where Frank Sinatra would play, or, the big guys, important guys. So I guess it came from him.
See, that's why we have to keep having these conversations, because I never knew that. And but I do think that window is so important as well, because it brings everything into a context, like a historical context in a moment, and I think that's for students, that's so invaluable to them, right? To see that. And I also kind of circling back to our initial conversation about the discrimination part is through your eyes and your lens, you also always elevated these stories and these experiences and for me, I never ever thought of like Black people as less than. I always thought of us as great.
I was thinking about my student loans, and I was like confused as well, maybe not confused, but I really made it a big issue of whether I should pay them all off at once or just pay them off slowly. Mm-hmm. And then I was trying to make the decision on what to pay off and what not to pay off. And I thought, some experiences, you cannot put a price tag on it. Mm-hmm. And my education, I can't was it worth it? I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And I never made that much. Mm-hmm. But it's like it gave me the ability to travel. I already knew where I wanted to go the first time I went to Europe. I knew exactly where I wanted to go, where Hemingway had gone. Yeah. Or Tale of Two Cities, where Dickens,
Yes.
That's not, but so would I change any of that? Would I change going to London or Turkey or South Pacific? No.
Yeah. And it's just, and I think one of the reasons why I just feel so appreciative is because you open so many doors and so many windows, and let people, all of us believe and know that we could. There wasn't a limit. There was no limits. The only limitation is the ones you place on yourself. So happy birthday, Mom. And I love you. Thank you.
I love you too. You're a beautiful daughter.
All right.
I do want to acknowledge that there were some questions in here in the Q&A geared towards me, and I appreciate them. Like, aren't you scared? I'll take those questions because I need to. I think publicly I am. Why not? Yeah, sure, I'm scared. I say